that bin Laden had put out a statement attacking Iran and Hezbollah, the Shiite group there in Lebanon with Sheikh Nasrallah, the people who basically defeated the Israelis back in 2006. This would be very, very interesting to look into. There's always been this idea of playing the Arabs and Sunnis, you might say, against Iranians and Shiites, Iranians, Persians, Shiites. That's one approach to the Middle East, and that would be a typical Brzezinski approach. It's also interesting. Bin Laden's family is supposedly, at least some of them, are being held prisoner in Tehran. That when they fled out of Afghanistan, so the story goes, right after 9/11, some of them went into Iran, and they were seized, and they were put under house arrest, some of them allegedly in the Saudi embassy. So you see there's a hostility between Al-Qaeda, which the Iranians have always called a CIA operation, and the Iranian government. Now, the bigger picture, what I see going on is a tendency of the world to get out of control of the U.S. and the British. In other words, the empire is in a big crisis, and its people are attempting to free themselves from this yoke. Just a couple of examples. My reading of the Copenhagen conference is that this was torpedoed by a joint operation, whether planned or unplanned, by Russia and China. In other words, the best account I can see is that those emails from the University of Anglia Climate Research Unit were first uploaded by a server in Tomsk in Siberia, in Russia, which is one of those old Soviet science cities that used to be off limits to foreigners. So Tomsk in Siberia puts them up. And then what happened in the conference was the Chinese blocked the attempt to impose these binding carbon targets, which they realized would have been strangling the economic development of China, and they worked together with Sudan. So it's a kind of a united front. Russia, China, Sudan defeated the Anglo-Americans and the European Union in the Copenhagen conference. Now, further along the line, in these countries, you've got strong political signs of people who want to free themselves. That would be Italy, Japan, and Saudi Arabia, which we've mentioned to some extent. The Italian case is an interesting one. Why is Berlusconi targeted? Berlusconi is targeted because he's a close friend of Putin. He's involved with the South Stream oil pipeline, which involves Russia, Turkey, Italy. The French seem to be buying into this to some extent. Other countries in the Balkans are interested in it. So Berlusconi gets hit in the face by this massive, heavy object there a couple of weeks before Christmas. In Japan, you've got the Hatoyama government. There was just a clash here at the State Department. Hillary Clinton called in the Japanese ambassador and read him the riot act saying, "We, the U.S., demand that we move the Okinawa base from one part of the island to another, and the Japanese don't like it." So Hillary Clinton is on the warpath against Japan, and I think underneath that, in whatever confused or more complete form, is a desire of the Japanese to assert some kind of national independence after being a ward of the United States for so many years. And then Saudi Arabia. It's interesting that in the past couple of weeks we've had a series of attacks on leading world governments. The Pope is tackled on New Year's Eve, right? It could have been an assassination attempt. Chirac, the former president of France, who led the opposition in the world against Bush's Iraq war, is indicted. Berlusconi hit in the face by this object. In Pakistan, the president and the whole cabinet have had their immunity lifted, so that the president is fearing this guy Zardari. He fears criminal charges. The defense minister is told that he's not allowed to leave the country, and the interior minister, the police minister, is going to be subjected to an indictment. So you can see there's an interesting pattern of things going on. So if you look across the world, you see resistance to London and New York coming from Russia, China, Sudan, Italy, Japan, Saudi Arabia, and, of course, the usual suspects, Pakistan and Iran, each
Who is organizing that resistance, or is that just happening organically?
I think some of it's organized. Some of it's organized. Some of it is simply ad hoc on the basis of
Do you think it's
countries.
Russian intelligence behind it?
No, I think part of it is just it's a structural aspect of the world. Things are breaking up, right? We've just had the crisis of the whole Anglo-American banking system. The degree of coordination, the degree of coordination between Berlusconi and Putin is total. That's for sure. There's no doubt about that one. Bandar, friend of Putin, once again. Japan, that's a little bit less clear to me.
And now we have a major break, though. I mean, I should interrupt. Finish that thought before I forget. We now have Putin coming out announcing we're going to produce even more deadly nukes since you're still encircling us.
Yes,
so that
right.
means that Obama 3 months ago saying, I'm not going to put the missiles in, we knew that was a classic fraud. He always says one thing, does another. So we're seeing the world shift right now in what I see globally as a portent of World War III. I mean, if wars start in a couple more places, won't that be the makings of a world war?
Well, it doesn't have to become a world war. I would compare it to Germany looking at Great Britain, or Great Britain looking at Germany before 1914. In other words, the British are sitting there, bankrupt, rather decadent, the empire running out of steam, and they see this rising industrial power of Germany, which has got all kinds of problems, but nevertheless they have a lot of economic growth. And the British basically say, well, if we have a peace race with them, we'll lose it. The only way we can deal with them is to encircle them and have a war. And I think you've got to remember, the Wall Street people respond to the collapse of their financial structures. When you have a world depression, when you have a world financial collapse like this, the response of London and Wall Street is to go berserk. They go bonkers, and they look around for these desperate, crazy plans like, who in his right mind wants to play Saudi Arabia against Iran? What's the benefit? Well, they'd say, well, if we can get the price of oil up to $500 a barrel, that will soak up all the dollars in the world, and that will give the dollar a new lease on life because there won't be so many dollars.
Exactly. Clearly,
around.
They're desperate to create a world crisis, to unify political support, and to jack up commodities. They're going to do it. So, and I totally agree. England, the Milner Group, they said we ought to finance rabble-rousers to take over Germany, Hitler. We ought to fund the Soviets to threaten them. That came after World War I. We ought to, kill their leaders to get them to physically attack us. I mean, we're going to see those same types of things now.
Let me just also, what you point to with Putin is very important. The U.S. and Russia are renegotiating a renewal of the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty of 1991. It was signed under Bush the Elder, and Gorbachev. This expired on the 5th of December, and all during the last couple of weeks, the word was coming from the State Department, well, it's just a few more little things we have to clear up. Don't worry, we'll get to it. But then Putin comes out and says, wait a minute. If you're going to have a defensive shield of anti-ballistic missiles, and you're going to deploy those in the Mediterranean and elsewhere, we cannot discuss offensive weapons apart from defensive weapons. We've got to put it all back together. So it looks like Putin is blocking whatever ideas have been developed for a deal. There will be no deal until Putin's demands are met. So that's quite a checkmate for Obama.
Well, he said they're going to come out with a new super topol, and the quote is here because, quote, the U.S. thinks it can do whatever it wants. We'll be right back. Okay, Webster, you've talked about what's going on in the world. It's absolutely spot on for my own research. Always amazing to see you predict things so far out in the future. So let's look into the future. What do you see happening in the next year?
Or catchwords would be depression, continued economic depression, maybe getting worse in a second wave. That could easily come in 2010. If not then 2011. So depression and repression. The repression is Obama. I put out some interviews. By the way, people can see all this or hear it at Tarpley.net. I finally got my website upgraded. So if you haven't seen it, the upgrades went up just a little bit before Christmas. So if people haven't looked at it, please do take a look, Tarpley.net. The idea being the comparison of Obama to Woodrow Wilson, a pedant, an elitist, a professor, Woodrow Wilson ran for president in 1916. He was, of course, a Morgan puppet. He had been put into office by J.P. Morgan, who got rid of William Howard Taft to open the way for Woodrow Wilson. Right, this is where we get the Federal Reserve System and a whole lot of other bad things. And he ran on this, he kept us out of war, right? Don't get into World War I. So he wins the election in 1916 and then turns around. As soon as he's back in office, within a month, he wants to declare war on Germany, which he does do. And then he passes the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act and throws a couple of thousand people in jail. It's light years, orders of magnitude beyond Bush-Cheney. The worst civil liberties emergency in the U.S. since the Civil War, and that's Woodrow Wilson. So you have Obama, lots of parallels, right? A Wall Street puppet, Morgan puppet, pretty much, runs with this very, very vague anti-Iraq war profile, although there was also the pledge to escalate Afghanistan.